You wouldn't believe the things you hear over mashed potatoes and gravy. Today, I'm going to tell you something that shook my world upside down and forced me to make the hardest decision of my life. Stick around, because by the end, you might see your family gatherings in a whole new light. I never imagined I'd be sitting here, 72 years old, telling you about the day I had to cut off my own daughter. But life has a way of teaching us lessons we never signed up for, doesn't it? If this story resonates with you, or if you know someone who needs to hear it, I'd be so grateful if you'd like this video and subscribe. These stories matter because somewhere out there, someone is going through exactly what I went through, and they need to know they're not alone. Let me take you back to that Sunday in late September here in Chicago, where the leaves were just starting to turn golden outside my kitchen window on the north side. I'd spent the entire morning preparing dinner, the way I always did. Pot roast in the slow cooker, the scent of rosemary and thyme filling every corner of my small but tidy bungalow. My hands, weathered and spotted with age, moved through the familiar motions of peeling potatoes, chopping carrots, setting the table with the good china that had belonged to my mother. The china was special, delicate porcelain with hand-painted roses along the rim. Each piece had survived the journey from Poland in 1952, wrapped carefully in my grandmother's wedding linens. I remember my mother telling me stories about those plates as she washed them after Sunday dinners when I was a child. "These survived a war," she'd say, holding one up to the light. "They can survive anything." I'd always use them for Sarah's visits, a connection to our family history, a reminder of resilience. Though lately, I wondered if I was more fragile than those plates, cracking a little more with each passing week. My daughter Sarah was coming over with her husband Marcus and their 7 children. 7. I still remember when she was pregnant with the first one, how excited I was to become a grandmother, how I'd knitted tiny booties and decorated a nursery in what used to be my sewing room. That was 18 years ago. 18 years of watching my home slowly transform from my personal sanctuary into a warehouse for her needs. That sewing room had once been my escape, my creative space, where I'd made quilts and embroidered pillowcases, where I'd spent peaceful afternoons with nothing but the hum of my machine and the satisfaction of creating something beautiful. Now it was stacked with boxes of outgrown children's clothes, broken toys waiting to be fixed, car seats in various states of disrepair. I couldn't remember the last time I'd actually sewn anything for myself. I wore my blue cardigan that day, the one with the pearl buttons. I remember because one of them was loose, and I kept fidgeting with it as I waited for them to arrive. My silver hair was pinned back neatly the way I'd worn it for decades. I looked at myself in the hallway mirror before they came, and I saw my mother's eyes staring back at me. Tired eyes. Eyes that had seen too much, given too much. I'd put on lipstick that morning, a soft rose shade my husband had once said made me look like Audrey Hepburn. It was a small vanity, a tiny act of self-care in a life that had become consumed by caring for others. But as I stared at my reflection, the lipstick seemed almost garish against my pale, tired face. A costume of vitality hiding the exhaustion beneath. They arrived at 2 o'clock sharp, a tornado of noise and chaos. The children burst through my door like a flash flood, tracking in mud from the autumn rain, their voices competing with each other in volume and urgency. Sarah came in last, her belly already showing despite being only 4 months, along with what I didn't yet know would be baby number 8. She kissed my cheek absently, her eyes scanning the room as if taking inventory. "Mom, did you get those juice boxes I asked for?" were her first words. Not, "Hello," not, "How are you?" Not, "Thank you for having us." Just a demand disguised as a question. I had gotten them, of course. 3 cases of the organic kind she insisted on. $24 I couldn't really afford, but had bought anyway, because what kind of grandmother would I be if I didn't have the right juice boxes? Marcus barely acknowledged me, settling into my late husband's favorite armchair with his phone. He never put that phone down, not even during meals. I'd learned to accept this small indignity, among so many others. I watched him sink into that leather chair, the one that still held the impression of my husband's body after all these years, and something twisted in my chest. Thomas had sat in that chair every evening, reading the newspaper or watching the news, his glasses perched on his nose. He'd rise immediately when I entered the room, offering me the seat, insisting I put my feet up after a long day. Marcus didn't even look up when I walked past carrying a heavy serving platter. The contrast was stark, painful. The dinner was chaos, as always. The younger children spilled their milk, argued over who got more mashed potatoes, and one of them somehow managed to knock over the gravy boat, sending brown liquid cascading across my grandmother's lace tablecloth. Sarah didn't even look up from her own plate. She was too busy complaining about how tight money was, how difficult it was to manage such a large household, how the rent on their apartment had gone up again. I watched the gravy seep into the delicate lacework, watched it spread like a stain across all those tiny, intricate stitches my grandmother had made by hand in the lamplight of her small apartment decades ago. My hands clenched under the table, nails digging into my palms. I wanted to scream. I wanted to grab that tablecloth, gravy and all, and demand they leave. But instead, I reached for a napkin, dabbed at the stain gently, uselessly, and murmured, "It's okay, accidents happen." "It's just so expensive now," Sarah continued, not even pausing as her 6-year-old deliberately flicked peas across the table at his brother. "The electric bill alone is killing us, and the kids keep growing out of everything. I don't know how we're going to manage." This was the script. This was always the script. She'd recite her financial woes like a prayer, each complaint a bead on a rosary of need, and I was expected to respond with the absolution of my checkbook. I knew my line. I'd performed it 100 times before. I listened, the way I always did. I nodded in the right places, made sympathetic sounds, and when she mentioned needing help with the electric bill again, I mentally calculated how much I could spare from my Social Security check. It was a dance we'd perfected over the years. She'd hint, I'd offer, she'd take, I'd give. Round and round we went. But this time, as I ran the numbers in my head, 300 for groceries, 450 for my own electric and gas, 200 for medications, 100 for the phone bill, I realized there was nothing left. I was already dipping into savings just to keep myself afloat. The mental math made my stomach clench with anxiety that had become so constant I'd almost stopped noticing it. Almost. After dinner, while I was clearing the dishes with my own arthritic hands because she never offered to help anymore, Sarah dropped the bomb. She stood in my kitchen doorway, one hand resting on her growing belly, and said with a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes, "Mom, I have wonderful news. We're expecting again. Number 8. Isn't that amazing?" I stood there, a stack of dirty plates in my hands, water from the faucet still running behind me. The words hung in the air like smoke. Number 8. My mind raced through the years of diapers I'd bought, the cribs I'd assembled, the clothes I'd purchased, the medical bills I'd helped with, the endless stream of my savings flowing into her bottomless well of need. I could feel the weight of those plates in my hands, the slick grease from the pot roast making them slide slightly in my grip. One of them had a chip now, I noticed. A small piece missing from the rim, probably from today, from the chaos of 7 children eating without supervision or care. Just like that. A piece of my family history, damaged, just like me. "That's wonderful, honey," I heard myself say, my voice sounding distant, mechanical. "Congratulations. I knew you'd be happy," she said, already moving back toward the living room. "We're going to need your help more than ever now. Marcus might lose his job, and with another baby coming, well, you understand." Might lose his job. This was the 3rd job in 2 years that Marcus might lose. I'd stopped asking what happened, stopped trying to understand whether he was unlucky or simply unwilling to meet his responsibilities. It didn't matter anymore. The result was always the same. My bank account got smaller, and their needs got bigger. I understood. I understood perfectly. I understood that I was not her mother anymore. I was her ATM, her safety net, her bottomless source of free labor and financial support. I stood there in my kitchen, surrounded by the remnants of a meal I'd cooked and paid for, in a house that was supposed to be my refuge in my golden years, and something inside me cracked. But I said nothing. Not that day. I finished the dishes. I hugged the grandchildren goodbye. I watched them pile into their van with my daughter at the wheel, and I closed my door on the mess they'd left behind. I stood in my living room, looking at the stains on my carpet, the fingerprints on my walls, the broken picture frame one of the kids had knocked over, and I felt something I hadn't allowed myself to feel in decades. The broken frame had held a photograph of Thomas and me on our 40th anniversary, just 2 years before he died. We'd gone to dinner at a nice restaurant, something we rarely did, and the waiter had taken our picture. Thomas was smiling at the camera, but I was looking at him, my expression soft with love. The glass had shattered, and a shard had torn through the photo, right through my face, as if erasing me from my own memory. Rage, pure, white-hot rage. I had given my whole life to being a good mother, a good grandmother. After my husband died 15 years ago, leaving me the house and a modest life insurance policy, I'd poured everything into my family. I'd helped Sarah and Marcus with their down payment on their first apartment. I'd co-signed loans. I'd paid for birthday parties and Christmas presents and school supplies. I'd babysat whenever they needed, which was constantly. I'd given until I had almost nothing left to give, and now she was pregnant again, expecting me to somehow conjure up more money, more time, more energy from my 72-year-old body and my dwindling bank account. I walked slowly to my bedroom, my knees aching with every step. I sat on the edge of my bed and pulled out the bottom drawer of my nightstand. Inside was a small wooden box, hand-carved by my father. I opened it and looked at the contents. Bank statements, investment documents, the deed to my house, my will. The box itself was a work of art, carved from walnut wood with delicate floral patterns along the edges. My father had made it for my mother on their 25th wedding anniversary, spending months in the basement workshop, his calloused hands carefully shaping each detail. After my mother died, he'd given it to me. "For your important things," he'd said, "the things worth protecting." I wondered what he'd think if he knew that what I was protecting now was proof of my own financial ruin, caused by my own daughter. I'd been so proud of this house. My husband and I had bought it in 1978, when this neighborhood was still working class, before it got gentrified. We'd raised Sarah here, in this 3-bedroom bungalow with its small backyard and the oak tree we'd planted the year she was born. We'd scrimped and saved, worked double shifts, went without vacations, all to give her a stable home and a good education. And she'd repaid us by seeing me as nothing more than a bank. I pulled out my latest bank statement and looked at the numbers. My retirement account that had once held $70,000 was down to $18,000. $18,000, and I was 72 years old. At this rate, I'd be destitute before I was 80. I thought about my own mother then, how she'd worked as a seamstress until her fingers were gnarled with arthritis, how she'd lived her final years in a nursing home that smelled of disinfectant and despair because she'd given everything to her children and had nothing left for herself. I'd visited her every week, watching her fade away in that narrow bed, promising myself I'd never end up like that. I remembered sitting by her bedside on one of those visits, holding her twisted hands while she slept. She'd woken suddenly, looked at me with eyes that were still sharp despite the fog of medication, and whispered, "Don't make my mistakes, Margaret. Don't give everything away. Save something for yourself." I'd squeezed her hand and promised, never imagining that decades later I'd be breaking that promise, walking the exact path she'd warned me against. Yet here I was, walking the same path. I put the papers back in the box and looked at the framed photo on my dresser. It was from Sarah's wedding day, 20 years ago. She looked so beautiful in her white dress, her smile radiant with hope and promise. I was standing next to her in my mother-of-the-bride dress, beaming with pride. I'd paid for that wedding, every penny of it, $23,000 for a single day, money I'd saved for years, meant for my own retirement. She'd promised to pay me back. That was 20 years ago. The photograph blurred as tears filled my eyes, but I blinked them back. I was done crying. I'd cried enough over the years, quiet tears in the darkness of my bedroom where no one could see my pain. I'd cried when Sarah forgot my birthday for the 3rd year in a row. I'd cried when she canceled our planned lunch dates because something more important came up. I'd cried when I overheard her on the phone complaining to a friend about how I didn't help enough, how I was getting old and useless. That phone conversation had been 2 months ago. I'd stopped by their apartment unannounced, my first mistake, with groceries I'd picked up on sale. Sarah hadn't heard me come in. She was in the bedroom with the door half closed, and her voice carried clearly. "I swear Mom is getting so difficult. She actually asked when we were going to pay her back for the car repair. Can you believe that? Like she's keeping score. And she takes forever to babysit now, always complaining about her knees. I mean, what else does she have to do all day?" I'd left the groceries on the kitchen counter and slipped out as quietly as I'd come. I'd driven home with my hands shaking on the wheel, pulled into my driveway, and sat there for 20 minutes before I could trust my legs to carry me inside. What else does she have to do all day? As if my life only had value in how it served hers. I thought I'd hidden it well, my heartbreak. I thought if I just kept giving, kept loving, kept sacrificing, eventually she'd see. Eventually she'd appreciate what I'd done. Eventually she'd love me back the way I loved her. But love, I was learning, isn't always returned in the measure it's given. I stood up from the bed, my knees protesting, and walked to the window. Outside, the street was quiet in the fading autumn light. My neighbor, Mrs. Henderson, was watering her garden, moving slowly with her cane. She waved when she saw me, and I waved back. Mrs. Henderson was 85 and lived alone, but she seemed happy, content. She'd told me once that she'd learned to set boundaries with her family, to say no when she needed to. I'd thought she was being selfish at the time. Now, standing in my window, looking at my reflection in the glass, I wondered if she'd actually been wise. My phone buzzed, a text message from Sarah. "Hey Mom, forgot to mention, the kids need new winter coats. Can you help out? They're growing so fast. Love you." Love you. 2 words that had lost all meaning. 2 words she used like a signature at the end of every request, every demand, every extraction of whatever I had left to give. I didn't respond. Instead, I set the phone down on the windowsill and walked to my small home office, the room that used to be Sarah's bedroom. Her childhood drawings were still tucked away in a box in the closet. Her old books lined a shelf. I'd kept everything, preserved it like a shrine to the daughter I'd loved, the daughter I thought I knew. Sometimes I'd take out that box and look through the drawings. Stick figures holding hands labeled "Me and Mommy." A house with a smoking chimney and flowers in the yard. Our happy home written in crayon across the top. A Valentine card she'd made me in 2nd grade. "I love you to the moon and back, Mommy. You're the best." When had that little girl, who'd loved me so genuinely, become this woman who saw me as nothing more than a resource to be mined? I turned on my computer, an old desktop that Sarah had mocked as ancient, and opened my email. There were 17 unread messages, most of them spam, but one caught my eye. It was from my financial advisor, George, a kind man in his 60s who'd been helping me manage what was left of my retirement funds. The subject line read, "Urgent. Please schedule appointment ASAP." My hands trembled as I clicked it open. The message was brief and professional, but the meaning was clear. At my current rate of withdrawals and expenses, my retirement account would be completely depleted within 3 years. He recommended we meet to discuss options, possibly selling the house, possibly moving to a more affordable living situation. Selling the house. My house. The home I'd built with my husband, the place where all my memories lived, the last piece of stability I had left in this world. The thought made my stomach turn. This house was more than just walls and a roof. It was the kitchen where I'd taught Sarah to bake cookies, where flower fights had ended in laughter and sticky hugs. It was the backyard where we'd had birthday parties, where Thomas had pushed Sarah on the swing set until she shrieked with joy. It was the living room where we'd opened Christmas presents, where we'd comforted each other through losses, where we'd celebrated victories. It was the bedroom where Thomas had died, holding my hand, telling me he loved me one last time. How do you put a price on that? How do you walk away from a lifetime of memories because your daughter can't stop having children she can't afford? I closed the email and sat in the darkness, listening to the house settle around me. Every creak and groan was familiar, a language I'd learned over 48 years of living within these walls. This house had witnessed my wedding, my daughter's birth, my husband's death. It held every moment of joy and sorrow that had shaped my life. And my daughter, my only child, was slowly taking it from me. Not with violence or obvious theft, but with something more insidious, with constant need, with entitled expectation, with the assumption that everything I had was hers by right, that my role in life was to serve her needs until I had nothing left to give. I thought about confronting her then, picking up the phone and telling her the truth. But what would I say? How do you tell your daughter that she's draining you dry? How do you explain that love shouldn't cost everything you have? How do you draw a line without shattering the fragile thread that still connected us? I couldn't. Not yet. Because despite everything, despite the anger and the hurt and the suffocating sense of being used, there was still a part of me that hoped, that believed if I just found the right words, the right moment, she'd understand. She'd see what she'd been doing. She'd change. Hope, I was learning, could be the cruelest prison of all. I turned off the computer and walked back to the living room. The mess from dinner was still there, waiting for me. Crumbs on the floor, sticky spots on the coffee table, toys scattered across the carpet. At 72, I'd spent my Sunday cooking a meal, hosting my family, and now I'd spend my evening cleaning up after them while they drove home to their apartment, probably already planning what they'd ask me for next. I picked up a stuffed animal from the floor, one of the many toys that permanently lived at my house for the grandchildren's visits. It was a worn teddy bear with one button eye missing. I remembered buying it for Sarah when she was 5, after she'd lost her favorite toy and cried for days. I'd searched 3 different stores to find one exactly like it, driven across the city in a snowstorm, spent money we couldn't afford, all to see her smile again. That was what mothers did, I'd thought. We sacrificed, we gave. We put our children's happiness above our own. But when did sacrifice become exploitation? When did giving become enabling? When did love become a transaction where only one party paid the price? I set the teddy bear on the mantel and looked at the photographs displayed there. Generations of my family smiled back at me. My parents, stern and hard-working, who'd immigrated to Chicago with nothing but their determination and dreams. My husband, young and handsome in his Navy uniform. Sarah at every age, from infant to adult. My grandchildren, 7 beautiful faces that I loved with all my heart. But loving them had cost me everything. And now, with number 8 on the way, it would cost me even more. I thought about my father then, how he'd worked himself into an early grave providing for our family. He died at 63, a heart attack while on the job at the steel mill. I'd been 20 years old, away at college on a scholarship I'd worked 2 jobs to supplement. He never got to retire, never got to travel or pursue hobbies or enjoy the fruits of his decades of labor. He just worked until his body gave out, and then he was gone. I was determined not to follow in his footsteps. I'd promised myself I'd enjoy my retirement, maybe travel a little, take up painting, spend time with friends. But here I was, 12 years into retirement, and I'd done none of those things. Instead, I'd become a full-time, unpaid nanny and a walking wallet for my daughter's ever-expanding family. The phone buzzed again. Another text from Sarah. Also, the van needs new tires. Marcus says it's not safe to drive the kids without them. Can you loan us $500? We'll pay you back next month. Promise. Promise. Another word that had lost all meaning. She'd promised to pay me back for the wedding, for the apartment deposit, for the furniture, for the medical bills, for the countless other expenses I'd covered over the years. The promises accumulated like dust, visible only when the light hit them just right and just as insubstantial. I set the phone down without responding and continued cleaning. Each movement was automatic, practiced from years of repetition. Wipe the table, vacuum the floor, put away the dishes, restore order to the chaos. This was my life now, an endless cycle of giving and cleaning and giving some more, with nothing flowing back in my direction except demands and expectations. By the time I finished, it was past 9 o'clock. My back ached, my knees throbbed, and exhaustion settled into my bones like an old friend. I made myself a cup of chamomile tea and sat in my husband's armchair, the leather worn smooth from years of use. I could still smell his cologne if I closed my eyes, still feel his presence in this room where we'd spent so many quiet evenings together. He'd been gone 15 years, but I missed him more in that moment than I had since his funeral. He would have known what to do. He would have seen what was happening and put a stop to it. He'd always been better at setting boundaries, at saying no when necessary. I'd been the soft one, the peacemaker, the one who smoothed over conflicts and sacrificed to keep everyone happy. Look where that had gotten me. I sipped my tea and stared at the wall, at the empty spaces where photographs used to hang before the grandchildren knocked them down one too many times. I'd stopped replacing them. What was the point? They'd just get broken again, and I didn't have the money to keep buying new frames. The tea grew cold in my hands as I sat there lost in thought. Outside, the neighborhood settled into its nighttime rhythm. Cars passed occasionally, their headlights sweeping across my living room walls. Somewhere down the street, a dog barked. Normal sounds of normal life continuing on while my world quietly crumbled. I thought about the inheritance my parents had left me, a small sum they'd saved through decades of careful frugality. I'd used it to help Sarah with her first house down payment, the house she'd lived in for 3 years before defaulting on the mortgage and losing it to foreclosure. The bank had taken the house, and my parents' legacy had evaporated like morning dew. I thought about my own inheritance planning, the will I'd carefully drafted with my lawyer 10 years ago. Everything I had was designated to go to Sarah, of course. The house, the remaining retirement funds, my few pieces of jewelry, the small life insurance policy. It had seemed natural at the time, the normal order of things. Parents provide for their children, even beyond death. But now, sitting in the darkness with cold tea and aching joints, I wondered what I was really leaving her. Permission to continue seeing me as a resource rather than a person? Validation that her behavior was acceptable? A final message that my own needs and wants didn't matter? I set the teacup down with a sharp click that echoed through the quiet room. Enough. Enough sitting in the dark, drowning in thoughts that went nowhere and changed nothing. I stood up, ignoring the protest from my knees, and walked to my bedroom. I needed to think, really think, about what I wanted from the years I had left, about what kind of grandmother I wanted to be, about what kind of woman I wanted to see in the mirror each morning. But as I lay in bed that night, staring at the ceiling where shadows from the streetlights danced and shifted, one thought kept circling back. It wasn't about what I wanted. It was about what I'd allowed. For years I'd taught Sarah through my actions that this was acceptable, that she could take and take without consequence, that my love was infinite and so were my resources. I'd created this situation as surely as she had, and if I wanted it to change, I was the one who would have to do the changing. The question was, did I have the strength? Did I have the courage? At 72, After a lifetime of putting others first, could I finally learn to put myself on the list? I closed my eyes, but sleep didn't come. Instead, I lay awake through the long hours of the night, listening to my house settle, feeling the weight of too many years of silence pressing down on my chest, and wondering if tomorrow would be the day I finally found my voice. But tomorrow came and went, and I said nothing. Days turned into weeks, and the pattern continued. Sarah texted her requests. I fulfilled them. She called with new crises. I offered solutions that always involved my money or my time or my energy. The grandchildren came and went like a tide, leaving debris in their wake that I cleaned up without complaint. October gave way to November. The oak tree in my backyard dropped its leaves, creating a carpet of gold and rust that I was too tired to rake. The temperature dropped, and I kept my thermostat lower than I liked to save money. Money that would inevitably find its way into Sarah's pockets. I'd become invisible in my own life, a ghost haunting my own house, going through the motions of existence without really living. I existed to serve others, and somewhere along the way, I'd forgotten that I was supposed to matter too. It was a Tuesday evening in early November when things began to shift. I was at the grocery store, carefully comparing prices and using coupons, when I ran into Eleanor Fitzgerald, an old friend I hadn't seen in months. Eleanor was 75, a retired schoolteacher who lived alone in a condo downtown. She looked vibrant, her white hair cut in a stylish bob, wearing a colorful scarf and actually smiling. We caught up briefly in the cereal aisle, and she mentioned she'd just returned from a cruise to Alaska. A cruise. I couldn't remember the last time I'd gone anywhere beyond the city limits. Eleanor talked about the glaciers and the wildlife, her eyes sparkling with genuine joy, and I felt something twist inside me. Envy. I was envious of my friend's freedom to live her life on her own terms. The whales, Eleanor said, her face lighting up with the memory. Margaret, I've never seen anything like it. They came right up to the boat, these enormous, magnificent creatures. I stood on the deck and watched them breach, and I actually cried from the beauty of it. When was the last time something made you cry from joy instead of sadness? I couldn't answer that question either. I couldn't remember the last time I'd cried from joy at all. You should come with me next time, Eleanor said, squeezing my hand. There's a group of us who travel together. We'd love to have you. I opened my mouth to refuse automatically, to list all the reasons why I couldn't possibly go. The expense, the grandchildren, Sarah's needs, my responsibilities. But Eleanor cut me off. Margaret, she said, her voice gentle but firm, when was the last time you did something just for yourself? I couldn't answer, because I honestly couldn't remember. Eleanor gave me a knowing look, the kind that comes from decades of wisdom. I used to be like you, she said, always putting everyone else first. Then my daughter sat me down one day and told me I needed to start living my own life. Best advice I ever got. Your daughter told you that, I thought. Mine just asks for more. We parted ways with promises to meet for coffee. Promises I knew I'd probably break because I wouldn't have time or Sarah would need something. I finished my shopping in a daze, Eleanor's question echoing in my mind. When was the last time I did something just for myself? I drove home through the November twilight, the streets familiar but somehow different, as if I was seeing them through new eyes. My neighborhood, once so full of young families and children playing, had aged along with me. Many of my old neighbors had moved away or passed on. The faces were different now, younger, full of energy and possibility. I felt ancient by comparison, used up, worn out. I parked in my driveway and sat in the car for a long moment, watching the lights come on in the houses around me. In those windows, I could see snippets of other lives, a family eating dinner together, someone watching television, a couple slow dancing in their kitchen. What did people see when they looked into my windows? An old woman alone, cleaning up after other people's messes, waiting for the next request that would drain her a little more? I gathered my groceries and went inside. The house was cold. I'd turned the heat down before leaving. I set the bags on the kitchen counter, and stood there, surrounded by the silence that had become my constant companion. My phone rang. Sarah. I let it go to voicemail. I couldn't face another request tonight, another need I was expected to fill. Instead, I put away the groceries, made myself a simple dinner of soup and crackers, and sat at my kitchen table alone. The voicemail notification blinked at me insistently. Finally, I gave in and listened. Hey, Mom, it's me. Listen, I know this is short notice, but Marcus and I really need a date night. We haven't been out together in months, and with the new baby coming, who knows when we'll get another chance. Can you watch the kids this Friday? We'll drop them off around 5 and pick them up Sunday afternoon. I'll bring their sleeping bags. Love you, thanks, you're the best. Not a question, an assumption. Friday to Sunday. 48 hours of 7 children, soon to be 8, in my small house. 48 hours of cooking and cleaning and breaking up fights and wiping tears and finding lost toys and changing diapers. At 72 years old, with my aching joints and my depleted energy, I was expected to handle a weekend that would exhaust someone half my age. I set the phone down carefully, afraid that if I held it any longer, I might throw it against the wall. My soup grew cold in front of me, but I couldn't eat. My stomach was churning with an emotion I couldn't quite name. It felt like drowning. Like being pulled under by a current too strong to fight, in water so deep I couldn't see the bottom. Every time I thought I might surface, another wave crashed over me, pushing me deeper. I looked around my kitchen, at the worn linoleum floor I'd been meaning to replace for years but couldn't afford, at the cabinets with their peeling veneer, at the refrigerator covered in the grandchildren's artwork, bright, cheerful drawings that mocked my gray reality. This wasn't the life I'd imagined for myself at 72. I'd thought I'd be traveling, volunteering, taking art classes, spending time with friends. I thought retirement would be a gift, a reward for decades of hard work and sacrifice. Instead, I'd traded one job for another. Except this one didn't pay and came with no vacation days and no appreciation. I pushed my soup away and walked to my bedroom. I pulled out that wooden box again, the one with all my financial documents. I spread them across my bed and really looked at them for the first time in months. The numbers were worse than I'd remembered. My checking account had $1,200. My savings had $6,000. My retirement account had $15,000 after the most recent withdrawal to help Sarah with her car repairs. $15,000. That's what was left of a lifetime of work and savings. At this rate, I'd be broke within 2 years, maybe less. And then what? Move in with Sarah? Become even more of a burden, sleeping on a couch in her crowded apartment, completely dependent on the daughter who couldn't even remember my birthday? The thought made me physically ill. I gathered up the papers with shaking hands and shoved them back into the box. I couldn't think about this now. It was too overwhelming, too frightening. But as I lay in bed that night, unable to sleep once again, a small voice in my head whispered a truth I'd been trying to ignore. This couldn't continue. Something had to change. And since Sarah showed no signs of changing, since she was content to keep taking until there was nothing left to take, that meant I was the one who had to act. The question was how, and when, and whether I had the courage to face the consequences of standing up for myself after so many years of lying down. I didn't have answers yet, but for the first time in a very long time, I was asking the right questions, and that, I supposed, was a start. Outside my window, the November wind rattled the bare branches of the oak tree, a sound like bones clicking together. I pulled my blanket tighter and closed my eyes, knowing sleep wouldn't come but hoping anyway. Hoping that somewhere in the darkness, I'd find the strength I needed. Hoping that it wasn't too late to reclaim some small piece of my life. Hoping that I mattered enough to fight for myself, even if no one else thought I did. The next morning, I called Sarah and told her I couldn't watch the kids that weekend. It was the first time I'd ever said no to her. She didn't take it well. "What do you mean you can't?" Her voice was sharp with disbelief. "Mom, we already made reservations. We paid a deposit. You can't back out now." My heart was pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. My hands were sweating. Every fiber of my being screamed at me to take it back, to apologize, to say yes, like I always did. But I held firm. "I'm sorry, honey, but I'm just not feeling up to it. 7 kids for a whole weekend is too much for me." There was a pause. Then, in a voice dripping with disappointment, "I thought I could count on you. I thought family was supposed to help each other." The guilt hit me like a physical blow. This was her weapon of choice, the guilt trip, and she wielded it with expert precision. For a moment I almost caved, almost said, "Yes, of course I'll do it. I'm sorry for being selfish." But then I thought about Eleanor on her cruise. I thought about my dwindling bank account. I thought about the fact that I mattered too. "I'm sorry," I repeated, and this time my voice was firmer. "You'll have to make other arrangements." She hung up without saying goodbye. I stood in my kitchen, phone in hand, trembling from head to toe. I'd done it. I'd actually said no. And the world hadn't ended. The sky hadn't fallen. Nothing catastrophic had happened. Except now my daughter was angry with me, and the guilt was eating me alive. She didn't call or text for 3 days. 3 days of silence that felt like punishment. I knew what she was doing. She was waiting for me to break, to call and apologize, to beg forgiveness for the crime of putting my own needs first for once. But I didn't call. I endured the silence, as painful as it was, and I used those 3 days to do some serious thinking. I made an appointment with George, my financial advisor. I sat in his office on a gray Thursday afternoon and laid out the truth. All of it. How I'd been supporting my daughter financially for years. How my accounts were nearly depleted. How I was terrified of ending up destitute. George listened without judgment, then pulled out a calculator and showed me the cold, hard numbers. At my current rate of spending and withdrawals, I'd be completely broke within 18 months. After that, I'd have no choice but to sell the house or rely entirely on Social Security, which wasn't enough to cover my basic living expenses. "Margaret," he said gently, "you need to stop. Immediately. No more loans, no more bailouts. If you want any chance of maintaining your independence in your final years, you have to cut her off financially." Cut her off. The words sounded so harsh, so final, but they were also true. "What you're doing," George continued, his expression serious, "is not helping her. You're enabling a pattern of financial irresponsibility. Every time you rescue her, you're teaching her that she doesn't need to change, that someone will always bail her out. And you're destroying your own security in the process." I left his office with a new budget, one that included $0 for Sarah. I also left with a heavy heart and a sense of impending doom. Because I knew that when I told her, when I finally drew that line in the sand, our relationship would never be the same. But maybe, I thought as I drove home through the December drizzle, that wasn't such a bad thing. Maybe our relationship needed to change. Maybe it needed to end, at least in its current toxic form, so that something healthier could grow in its place. Or maybe it would just end, period. And I'd spend my remaining years alone, cut off from my only child and my grandchildren, a cautionary tale about the price of setting boundaries too late. I didn't know which outcome awaited me, but I knew I couldn't keep living the way I had been. Something had to give. And this time, it wasn't going to be me. The confrontation I'd been dreading came in mid-December, 2 weeks before Christmas. Sarah finally broke her silence with a phone call on a Sunday evening. I was wrapping presents for the grandchildren, simple gifts I'd found on sale, the last Christmas I'd be able to afford much of anything if I didn't change course. "Mom, we need to talk about Christmas," she said without preamble. "The kids have their wish lists, and between that and the new baby expenses, we're really stretched thin. I was thinking you could handle most of the presents this year. You know, take some of the pressure off us." Here it was, the moment of truth. I could feel my heart pounding in my chest, my palms sweating. Every instinct screamed at me to agree, to smooth things over, to be the good mother who never let her child down. But I thought about George's calculator. I thought about those 18 months until I'd be broke. I thought about ending up like my mother, alone in a nursing home, with nothing left but regrets. Actually, Sarah, I need to talk to you about something important. Can you come over tomorrow? Can't we just discuss it now? I'm busy. No, this needs to be in person, tomorrow at 2 o'clock. It's important. She showed up 20 minutes late, annoyed and impatient. She sat on my couch, one hand on her belly, looking at me with barely concealed irritation. I'd prepared for this moment. I'd written down what I wanted to say, practiced in front of the mirror, steeled myself for her reaction. But now, facing her, all my carefully rehearsed words fled. "I can't give you any more money," I blurted out. "I'm sorry, but I can't. I'm running out of savings, and I need what's left for my own survival." She stared at me like I'd spoken in a foreign language. "What are you talking about?" "I'm talking about the fact that I've given you over $50,000 in the past 5 years. I've paid for your rent, your car repairs, your kids' clothes, your medical bills, your furniture, your groceries. I've depleted my retirement account trying to keep you afloat, and I can't do it anymore." "You kept track?" Her voice was incredulous. "You actually kept track of how much you've helped your own daughter?" "My financial advisor kept track, and he told me that if I continue at this rate, I'll be completely broke within 2 years. She stood up, her face flushed with anger. "I can't believe you. After everything I've been through, after all the struggles I've had, you're going to abandon me now? When I need you most?" "I'm not abandoning you. I'm setting boundaries. There's a difference. Boundaries." She laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Is that what they're calling it now? Selfishness?" The word hit me like a slap. Selfish, the accusation I'd feared most, the label I'd spent my entire life trying to avoid. "It's not selfish to want to survive," I said quietly. "What about my survival? What about your grandchildren? You're going to let them suffer because you want to hoard your money?" "I'm not hoarding anything. I'm trying to make sure I don't end up homeless and destitute at 75. You're being dramatic. You have this house. You have Social Security. You're fine." "I'm not fine, Sarah. I'm drowning, and you're the one holding me underwater." The words came out sharper than I'd intended, but they were true. She recoiled as if I'd struck her. "How dare you?" she whispered. "After all I've been through, after losing the house, after Marcus lost his job, after everything, how dare you make me feel guilty for needing help?" "I don't want you to feel guilty. I want you to understand that I can't be your safety net anymore. You're 42 years old with 7 children and 1 on the way. You need to figure out how to support your family without relying on your elderly mother's retirement savings." "You want me to what? Let my kids go hungry? Let them freeze because I can't pay the heating bill?" "I want you to make better choices. Maybe don't have an 8th child if you can't afford the 7 you already have." The silence that followed was arctic. She stared at me with such hatred that I actually took a step back. "I see," she said finally. "So this is about me being pregnant. You think I shouldn't have this baby?" "That's not what I said." "But it's what you meant. You know what? I don't need this. I don't need your money or your judgment. We'll be fine without you." She stormed toward the door, but I wasn't done. I'd gone this far. I might as well say everything. "Sarah, wait. There's something else you need to know." She turned, her hand on the doorknob. "What?" I went to my office and retrieved a folder I'd prepared. Inside were copies of documents I'd discovered 3 weeks earlier, documents that had shattered what little remained of my trust in my daughter. I'd been organizing my financial papers when I found it, a power of attorney form, signed with my signature, giving Sarah access to my bank accounts. Except I'd never signed it. I'd never even seen it before. The signature was close enough that a bank teller might not question it. But I knew my own handwriting. There was more. Applications for credit cards in my name, all denied, thank God, but attempted. A loan application using my house as collateral. She'd been trying to steal from me. Not just take what I willingly gave, but actually forge documents and commit fraud to access money I hadn't offered. I handed her the folder without a word. She opened it and I watched the color drain from her face. "I can explain," she started. "Don't. Just don't. I know what this is." The bank manager called me when the loan application came through. That's how I found out. I've spent the past 3 weeks trying to understand how my daughter could do this to me. I was desperate. We were going to lose the apartment. You needed to commit fraud, to forge my signature, to try to steal my house out from under me? It's not stealing. You're going to leave everything to me anyway when you die. I just needed access sooner. The casual cruelty of those words took my breath away. When I die, she'd actually calculated my death into her financial planning. "Get out," I said, my voice shaking. "Mom, please let me explain. Get out of my house, now." She left, taking the folder with her, slamming the door so hard that a picture fell off the wall. I stood in the sudden silence, my whole body trembling with shock and rage and grief. My daughter had tried to steal from me, had forged my signature, had been plotting to take my house, my only security, the only thing standing between me and poverty. And the worst part was, she didn't even seem to think she'd done anything wrong. I sank onto the couch and finally allowed myself to cry. Not quiet tears this time, but great heaving sobs that shook my entire frame. I cried for the daughter I'd thought I had, the one who existed only in my imagination. I cried for the years I'd wasted trying to earn love that was never truly offered. I cried for my own naivety, my willful blindness to what was right in front of me. When the tears finally stopped, I felt hollow, empty, but also, strangely, lighter, as if something heavy I'd been carrying for years had finally been set down. I picked up my phone and called my lawyer. It was time to make some changes. The next morning, I met with Martha Sullivan, the attorney who'd handled my husband's estate. I showed her everything: the forged documents, the fraudulent credit applications, the pattern of financial exploitation. I told her about the years of demands, the emotional manipulation, the way Sarah had systematically drained my accounts. Martha listened with increasing concern, taking notes, asking pointed questions. When I finished, she sat back in her chair and fixed me with a serious look. "Margaret, what your daughter has done is elder financial abuse. It's a crime. You could press charges." Press charges against my own daughter. The thought made me feel sick. "I don't want her to go to jail," I said. "She has children, but I need to protect myself." "Then we need to take immediate action. First, I'm going to help you file a police report, not to prosecute, but to create a paper trail. Then we're changing all your accounts, setting up safeguards, and revising your will. We need to make sure she can never access your assets again without your explicit written permission." Over the next week, I did things I never imagined I'd have to do. I filed a report with the Police Fraud Division. I closed all my old bank accounts and opened new ones at a different bank. I changed my passwords, my PIN numbers, everything. I revised my will, removing Sarah as the sole beneficiary and instead setting up a trust that would be managed by an independent party after my death. I also, on Martha's advice, installed security cameras around my house, because Sarah had keys and Martha didn't trust her not to try something. It felt paranoid and excessive, like something from a crime drama, not real life. But it was my life now. My daughter was someone I needed protection from. Sarah called and texted constantly, alternating between apologies and accusations. The messages ranged from, "I'm so sorry, I was just desperate," to, "You're ruining my life. How can you be so cruel?" I didn't respond to any of them. Martha had advised me to cease all direct communication. Christmas came and went without us speaking. I spent it alone for the first time in decades, sitting in my quiet house, looking at the presents I'd wrapped for grandchildren I wasn't allowed to see. Sarah had made it clear that if I wasn't going to help financially, I wasn't welcome in their lives. It hurt. God, it hurt. But it also clarified something I'd been too afraid to face. Her love had always been conditional. It wasn't based on who I was as a person, as her mother. It was based solely on what I could provide. That realization was devastating, It was also freeing. In January, I got a call from Pastor James at the church I'd attended sporadically over the years. Someone had told him about my situation, and he wanted to meet. I agreed, more out of loneliness than any real hope that he could help. We met in his office on a cold Tuesday afternoon. He was in his late 50s, kind-eyed, with graying hair and a gentle manner. I told him everything, the whole sordid story, and he listened without judgment. "You know," he said when I finished, "I see this more often than you'd think. Adult children who see their elderly parents as resources rather than people. It's a form of abuse that doesn't get talked about enough." "I just don't understand how it got to this point," I said. "How did I raise someone who could do this?" "You didn't raise her to be this way. Life did. Circumstances did. Her own choices did. You can't take responsibility for the adult she became. You can only take responsibility for your own choices from here forward. I feel like I failed as a mother." "Or maybe," he said gently, "you succeeded too well. You taught her that you would always be there, always sacrifice, always put her needs first, and now she can't imagine any other arrangement." His words hit home. I had taught her this. Through my actions, through my inability to say no, through my desperate need to be needed, I'd created a monster of my own making. "So what do I do now?" I asked. "You live for yourself. Maybe for the first time in your life, you put yourself first. You pursue your own happiness, you protect yourself, and you let her face the consequences of her own choices." It sounded so simple when he said it, but I knew it would be the hardest thing I'd ever done. He connected me with a support group at the church, other elderly people who'd experienced financial abuse from family members. I started attending the weekly meetings, and I was shocked by what I heard. Stories worse than mine. Stories that made my situation seem almost mild by comparison. There was Robert, whose son had stolen his identity and run up hundreds of thousands in debt. There was Helen, whose daughter had convinced her to sign over her house and then evicted her. There was Frank, whose entire family had systematically isolated and exploited him for years. But there were also stories of recovery, of people who'd set boundaries and reclaimed their lives, of relationships that had, in some cases, eventually healed, of elderly people who'd found joy and purpose and independence after years of exploitation. These stories gave me hope. They also gave me permission to stop feeling guilty. In February, something unexpected happened. My youngest grandchild, Emma, who was 16, called me. She'd gotten my new number somehow, and she wanted to talk. We met at a coffee shop near her school. She was tall for her age, with Sarah's dark hair but her grandfather's kind eyes. She ordered a hot chocolate and sat across from me, fidgeting with her cup. "Grandma," she said finally, "I wanted you to know that I understand why you did what you did. I heard Mom and some of the family talking, and I realized they've been using you. I'm sorry." I was stunned. Here was someone from Sarah's household taking my side. "Your mom is very angry with me," I said carefully. "Mom is angry with everyone. She's always angry." Emma looked down at her cup. "It's hard living there. There's never enough money, never enough space, and she blames everyone but herself. I'm counting down until I'm 18 and can move out." My heart broke for her. "Where will you go?" "I got accepted to a state school with a full scholarship. I'll live in the dorms. I just need to survive one more year at home." I saw myself in her, the determination to escape, to build a better life. "If you ever need anything," I started, then caught myself. I couldn't afford to support another person. "If you ever need to talk, I'm here." She smiled, and it was like sunshine breaking through clouds. "Actually, I was hoping we could meet like this sometimes. I miss you. I miss having one sane adult in my life." We started meeting every other week after that. Just coffee, just talking. She told me about school, her dreams, her plans. I listened and offered what wisdom I could. I didn't give her money except for occasional coffees, and she didn't ask. It was a relationship based on genuine affection, not financial transaction. And it healed something in me I didn't know was broken. Through Emma, I learned that Sarah was struggling. Marcus had lost another job, they were behind on rent again, and the new baby was colicky and difficult. Part of me felt guilty, wondering if I should help. But the larger part? The part that was learning to protect itself, knew that helping would only enable the same destructive patterns. In March, I did something radical. I booked a trip to Alaska. The same cruise Eleanor had told me about. It cost $3,000, money I would have never spent on myself before, money that would have automatically gone to Sarah in the old days. But I was learning that I deserved nice things too, that spending money on my own happiness wasn't selfish. It was necessary. I told Emma about the trip, and her eyes lit up. "That's amazing, Grandma. You deserve it." I didn't tell Sarah. I didn't owe her an explanation for how I spent my own money. The day before I was set to leave, Sarah showed up at my door. I saw her through the new security camera and almost didn't answer. But curiosity got the better of me. I opened the door but didn't invite her in. She looked terrible, exhausted, with dark circles under her eyes and her clothes disheveled. The baby was crying in a carrier on her chest. "Mom, please," she said without preamble. "We're being evicted. We need $3,000 or we're on the street. You have to help us." $3,000, exactly what I'd spent on the cruise. The irony wasn't lost on me. "I can't help you," I said. "Can't or won't." "Both." Her face crumpled. "How can you be so heartless? Your grandchildren are going to be homeless and you don't care." "I care deeply. But I can't sacrifice my entire future to fix problems you created. You need to call social services, find housing assistance, talk to charities. There are resources available, but I'm not one of them anymore." "Please," she begged. And for a moment, I wavered. This was my daughter, after all, my only child, the baby I'd held in my arms, the little girl I'd raised, the woman who'd given me grandchildren. But then I thought about the forged documents, the years of manipulation, the way she'd tried to steal my house, and I held firm. "I'm sorry, Sarah, I truly am, but the answer is no." I closed the door on her tears, on the crying baby, on the guilt that threatened to swallow me whole. I stood with my back against the door, shaking, feeling like the worst person in the world. But I didn't open it again. I didn't call her back. I didn't write a check. For the first time in my life, I held the line. The next day, I flew to Seattle and boarded a cruise ship to Alaska. I spent a week surrounded by strangers who became friends, viewing glaciers and whales and mountains so beautiful they made me cry. I laughed at the dinner table with Eleanor and her travel group. I took photos of everything. I felt alive in a way I'd forgotten was possible. I also felt guilty, tremendously, overwhelmingly guilty. Every beautiful sunset made me think about Sarah and the kids. Every delicious meal reminded me that they were struggling. I couldn't fully enjoy anything because part of me felt like I didn't deserve happiness while they suffered. But Eleanor, wise Eleanor, caught me staring out at the ocean one evening with tears in my eyes. "You're thinking about her," she said. It wasn't a question. I nodded. "Let me tell you something," Eleanor said. "You can't save someone who's drowning if they're pulling you under with them. Sometimes the kindest thing you can do is let go and save yourself. Not because you don't love them, but because you do. Because maybe hitting rock bottom is the only thing that will make them change. What if they don't change? What if they just suffer? Then that's their choice, just like it's your choice whether to drown with them or swim to shore." Her words stayed with me for the rest of the trip. I repeated them like a mantra whenever the guilt became too much. I can't save her by drowning with her. When I returned home in late March, tan and rested for the first time in years, there were 17 voicemails from Sarah. I didn't listen to them. I'd learned that nothing she had to say would change my position. And hearing her voice would only weaken my resolve. Emma texted that they'd found emergency housing through a church program. They weren't homeless, just in a smaller, less comfortable situation. The crisis had passed without my intervention. I felt relieved, and also strangely validated. They'd survived without me. They'd found other resources. They didn't actually need me. They just wanted me because I was easier than doing the work themselves. Spring came to Chicago, bringing with it a renewal of life and color. I joined a watercolor painting class at the community center. I started volunteering at a local library. I had coffee with Emma every week and occasional lunches with Eleanor and her friends. I was building a life. Not the life I'd expected at 72, but a good one nonetheless. A life with boundaries and friendships and activities that brought me joy. In May, Martha called with news. The police investigation into the forged documents had concluded. They weren't prosecuting Sarah criminally, but the evidence was documented. More importantly, my new safeguards were working. Sarah had apparently tried to access my old accounts several times, not knowing they were closed. "You made the right choice," Martha told me. "I know it doesn't feel like it, but you protected yourself. That's brave." Brave. I didn't feel brave. I felt sad and guilty and confused. But maybe that's what courage actually was, doing the hard thing even when it hurts. In June, the second twist came. I received a certified letter from Sarah's lawyer. She was suing me for grandparents' rights, trying to force me to provide financial support for the children. I sat in Martha's office, reading the legal papers, feeling like I'd been punched in the stomach. "Can she do this?" I asked. "She can try, but grandparents' rights typically apply to visitation, not financial support. And given that she's the one who cut off contact, not you, she doesn't have much of a case. This is intimidation, pure and simple. She's trying to scare you into giving her money." It was working. I was terrified. The thought of a court battle, of having our family dysfunction aired publicly, of being portrayed as a neglectful grandmother, made me sick. But Martha filed a response, and we prepared to fight. Because giving in now would mean giving in forever. The legal process dragged on through the summer. Depositions, document requests, mounting legal fees. It was exhausting and expensive and emotionally devastating. But I pushed forward, supported by Martha, by Pastor James, by Eleanor and Emma and my support group. In August, Sarah's lawyer dropped the case. Apparently, they'd realized they had no legal standing and continuing would only rack up fees Sarah couldn't pay. I should have felt victorious. Instead, I just felt empty. Because the case being dropped didn't change the fundamental truth. My relationship with my daughter was broken, probably beyond repair. But something else had happened during those months of legal battle. I'd found my strength. I'd discovered that I could stand up for myself, could fight back, could survive the guilt and the judgment and the fear. I'd learned that I mattered. In September, almost a year after that fateful Sunday dinner announcement, I had my annual checkup with my doctor. For the first time in years, my blood pressure was normal. I'd lost the stress weight I'd been carrying. I was sleeping through the night. "Whatever you're doing," Dr. Richardson told me, "keep doing it. You're healthier now than you've been in a decade." What I was doing was living for myself, putting my needs first, setting boundaries, saying no. It turned out that self-care wasn't selfish after all. It was survival. That evening, I sat on my back porch, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and pink. The oak tree my husband and I had planted all those years ago was full of leaves, rustling softly in the breeze. I thought about Sarah, about the grandchildren I rarely saw anymore except for Emma. I thought about all the years of sacrifice and struggle and pain, and I realized something profound. I'd spent my whole life trying to buy love. With money, with time, with energy, with every piece of myself I could give away. I'd believed that if I just sacrificed enough, gave enough, loved hard enough, I'd finally be valued, finally be cherished, finally be enough. But love that has to be purchased isn't love at all. It's a transaction, and I'd finally learned the difference. The family I'd been born into, the family I'd created, might never understand. They might never forgive me for choosing myself. And that was okay, because I was learning to forgive myself for all the years I didn't. Emma came by that evening, bringing Chinese takeout and stories from her first week of senior year. We ate on the porch, laughing about her teachers and her friends, making plans for her college visits. "Grandma," she said as the stars began to appear, "I'm proud of you. I know that sounds weird, a granddaughter being proud of her grandmother, but I am. You stood up for yourself. You showed me that it's okay to have boundaries, even with family, especially with family." Her words brought tears to my eyes. "Thank you, sweetheart. That means more than you know." After she left, I sat alone in the gathering darkness, feeling something I hadn't felt in years. Peace. Genuine, deep down, soul-level peace. Was I lonely sometimes? Yes. Did I miss the chaos of family dinners, even the difficult ones? Absolutely. Did I wonder if I'd done the right thing? Every single day. But I was also painting watercolors and taking cruises and sleeping peacefully and managing my finances responsibly. I was building friendships based on mutual respect rather than obligation. I was discovering who I was beyond being a mother and a grandmother and a walking wallet. I was, for the first time in my 72 years, truly living. The phone rang. Sarah. I let it go to voicemail, like I always did now. But this time, I listened to the message. "Mom, it's me. I've been doing some thinking and some therapy. The court case kind of woke me up to some things. I'm not ready to apologize yet. I'm still too angry, but I wanted you to know I'm trying to understand. My therapist says I have some patterns to work on. Anyway, I hope you're okay. That's all." It wasn't much. It wasn't an apology or a promise to change, but it was something, a tiny crack in the wall between us. I didn't call back, not yet, because real change takes time, and I'd learned the hard way that hope without evidence is just wishful thinking. But I saved the message, just in case. October arrived, bringing with it the anniversary of that Sunday dinner, that announcement that had changed everything. I marked the occasion by doing something I'd always wanted to do. I enrolled in a creative writing class at the local college. On the first day, the instructor asked us to write about a transformative moment in our lives. I sat there with my pen hovering over the page, thinking about all I'd been through. And then I started writing, not about the pain or the betrayal or the financial abuse, but about the moment I'd chosen myself, the moment I'd said no, the moment I'd decided that my life, my happiness, my survival mattered as much as anyone else's. I wrote about drowning and learning to swim, about setting boundaries and discovering strength, about the difference between love and transaction, between sacrifice and self-destruction. When I finished, I had tears on my cheeks and a story that needed to be told. The instructor read it and looked at me with newfound respect. "This is powerful," she said. "Have you thought about sharing it more widely? There are people who need to hear this." Maybe there were, maybe somewhere out there. Another elderly person was drowning in family obligations, believing they had no choice, no options, no right to put themselves first. Maybe my story could be their lifeline. I'm 73 now. I have a modest savings account, a paid-off house, and a budget that actually works. I have hobbies and friends and plans for the future. I have one grandchild who visits regularly and genuinely enjoys my company. I also have a daughter I barely speak to and grandchildren I rarely see. That reality still hurts. I suspect it always will. But I'm learning that you can grieve a relationship while also knowing it was necessary to let it go. You can love someone from a distance. You can wish them well while also protecting yourself from their destructive patterns. This is what I've learned. Family isn't supposed to drain you dry. Love isn't supposed to cost everything you have. And choosing yourself isn't selfish. Sometimes it's the only path to survival. So here's my question for you. Have you ever had to set boundaries with family? Have you experienced the guilt of choosing yourself over someone you love? Or maybe you've been on the other side, learning that your actions were hurting someone who only wanted to help? Whatever your story is, I'd love to hear it. Share your experiences in the comments. Sometimes the most healing thing we can do is realize we're not alone in our struggles. And if this story resonated with you, if you found something useful or validating or hopeful in my journey, please like this video and subscribe. Because there are people out there who need to hear these messages. People who think they have no choice but to give until there's nothing left. People who need permission to matter. Let's be that permission for each other. Let's remind each other that we deserve to live, not just survive. That boundaries aren't walls, they're bridges to healthier relationships. And that sometimes the most loving thing we can do is let go and save ourselves. Thank you for listening to my story. May you find the strength to write your own ending, whatever that looks like for you. And may you always remember, you matter. Your happiness matters. Your survival matters. Never let anyone convince you otherwise, not even family, especially not family.